Has the front line of the Ukraine war become even more of a drone-filled dystopia? Just what is it like to be an infantryman in this high-tech combat zone? We are going to take a look at some of the reporting from the front lines, from Kiev Post, at a town that actually I was in when I was in Ukraine last year. Let's get into it. Okay. So this is a look inside the battle for Kostiantynivka. And for those of you that don't recall, when I was in Ukraine, I was in the Eastern Front, particularly near Kramatorsk, and I ended up passing through Kostiantynivka en route to attempt to go to a headquarters near the Battle of Turretsk. Again, we didn't make it because we literally got stalked and strafed by a Russian drone. So we had to turn back again, but we were around this Ivanopolia region, or Plashivka. However, the fact that now the battle is for Kostiantynivka is a sign of just how the war has changed in some ways and not changed in others. So I want to point this out, that the distance from downtown Kostiantynivka to Turretsk is only about 20 kilometers, right? Again, that is so less. That's something like the distance of maybe like a half marathon, right? Maybe 14, 15 miles at most. Maybe not even that. But no, I'm sorry. I have this wrong. I have my math wrong. Yeah, this is like 6 to maybe 8 miles, right? So this is about 8 miles away. And from downtown Turret to downtown Kostiantynivka. And when we look back at approximately a year ago, this is when I was in Ukraine, you could see that this is where the front line was. And you can see that Russian forces have made some advances, but ultimately they have still failed to seize, for example, Turretsk. And basically the Russians are completely failing at taking any major towns or regions. And this is, again, a year's worth of progress. But the change, as this reporting reveals, is not necessarily that the Russian control area has changed significantly. It's that the battlefield itself has become vastly more chaotic. And that was, I think, the biggest takeaway from this, is that as they point out, the city of Kostiantynivka, again, as recently as 4 months ago, still had things like coffee shops and pizza, and even some civilians working and living in the city. But that has simply ceased to be. Even though the front lines haven't moved dramatically closer to the town, what has happened is that there's been an expansion, what they call a saturation of the sky, with both strike and reconnaissance drones on both sides. And they profile one drone unit specializes in long-range fiber optic FPVs. And that's sort of the game changer here. They point out that these fiber optic FPVs, including by using relays, are able to reach deeper into the battlefield. Right, here's some examples. You can see Ukrainian drones here with their batteries, their fiber optic spools, all laid out, ready to go. But what's fascinating is that now fiber optic drones are so pervasive, according to this reporting, that the FPVs aren't even worth targeting individual soldiers. Instead, they simply throw the FPVs into greenery, areas where they think they may have seen Russian movement, right? Where there might be troops. And that's because, as they point out, that the front line now, concentrations of soldiers last so little time. They are so easily targeted when imagine you're a group of 10 people, right? It's easy to spot a group of 10 people. It's much harder to spot a group of 2 or 3. And so that's where the Russians operate. But the Ukrainians have the same problem, as they point out, that Ukrainians also have small groups of 2 or 3 that are spread thinly through the front lines, right? Because there's this pervasive drone threat, the what they call the gray zone, the area between occupied frontline positions, measures in the dozens of kilometers. So the fact is that this region here to here, from Russian control to Ukrainian control, is something like 10 to 15 kilometers of gray zone, right? Where anywhere here, small groups of Russian troops are going to try to squeeze past small concentrations of Ukrainian defensive troops. But the fact is that the most of the work on each side is done by these FPVs. Now, what does this mean for the larger conflict? We're going to talk about that in just a second, but before we do, I wanted to mention that if you want to see just exactly how this combat has evolved, the only place to get that is going to be on combatvetnews.com. YouTube won't let me show you basically any combat footage, but I think it's important to understand what the real battlefield looks like. So every Tuesday and Thursday, we take the most recent combat footage that has dropped, including sometimes combat footage that has not dropped yet, right? I'm routinely sent videos from some of my contacts in Ukraine that operate drones, and we do a deep dive breakdown over the current state of affairs on a granular tactical level. So if you want to do that plus support the channel, you want to pick up a membership, right? Specialist tier will get you access to the twice weekly drops, plus it's going to get you the full archive going back to the start of the war. But lieutenant tier and colonel tier, they'll get the shout outs at the end of videos and the access to the Q&As and all this other stuff. So support me, get access to that stuff. Click the link in the description. Okay. So what I think is most interesting is that the Ukrainians point out that there's some terrain that the Russians simply just can't operate in, right? They point out that the Russians disappear in thick foliage, and they just will literally say, okay, well, we just strike as near as we can get the drones, so they'll crawl out and show themselves, right? And this is done between FPV strike drones and small bomber drones that are modified Mavics close to the zero line, targeting Russian infantry as they advance. But as he points out, he says, listen, at the beginning of 2025, they were routinely seeing motorized and mechanized formations. That would be troops advancing along roadways and motorcycles, ATVs, and of course, armored vehicles and even tanks. They said we would see columns of vehicles every day, up to 20 of them. But then he says we would destroy them, and by the afternoon, we were just sitting watching them burn. He says since April, it's been small groups of infantry that creep along fields and trees, as little as 1 to 5 people. Imagine being the one-person group. Imagine being one dude being told, listen, you're going to advance along this tree line until you can't advance. And you'll know you can't advance because a drone will kill you. So, yikes. But the Ukrainians and Russians have another tactical challenge, is that the logistics become some of the biggest targets, right? Because basically the infantry can barely advance, right? Even if how much can one dude do? How much can 5 people do to change the scope of a battlefield? Not that much, particularly if they're unable to be resupplied. And so targeting the logistics is become a core part of the battlefield. And that's why you see, for example, in even the banner video here is, look, a road leading there that is literally wall-to-wall netting. This is to prevent FPV drones from striking vehicles as they pass to and from the area. And this is because those are key logistics routes. And so there's a huge incentive for these strike drones, which, remember, now they have lighter weight, thinner fiber optic cable that can reach 30 kilometers. It's absolutely not unheard of for that to be possible. And so for context, that means you can see strikes. If you are a Russian drone team, you could strike literally halfway to Kramatorsk. You could strike so deep, 30 kilometers. Again, nearly 18 miles from your frontline position. And that makes logistics very, very difficult. And you see why, particularly if you're trying to get any sort of scale. You don't need to find someone within this 30-kilometer radius. You know they're going to take the paved roads because that's the only way trucks loaded with heavy logistics can work. So you have trucks, right, doing these logistics routes. You have FPVs trying to hit them every single chance they get. And the Ukrainians are doing the same thing. Don't kid yourselves. If you are the Russians in Touretsk, you have the same problem of 30 kilometers of Ukrainian FPVs looking to piece these guys apart, right? Looking to find any kind of major roadway. And they all know the routes to these positions. So they're going to simply try to stop them wherever they can. But then you have another problem. Let's say you get a logistics convoy with food, water, ammunition into position. Well, now you have to get it the last couple of feet. Because remember, these soldiers, every soldier needs to eat. They need to get ammo resupply. They need stuff. And they are scattered in groups of 2 to 3 to 4 in a sort of smattering across the front line here. It's not like World War I, where there is a trench laden with soldiers stretching from the strong point to strong point. It's not like that. It's 2 dudes in a basement, 4 dudes in a bunker, 3 more guys in a bunker, 800 meters away. And every one of them needs to be resupplied. So what do they rely on? Well, they rely on one of the tools that we also saw when I was in Ukraine, the Baba Yaga, the vampire drone. And this is a heavy lift drone. Let's see if I can find you guys the pictures here. This is a heavy lift drone that we saw, and actually they were testing it as a remote mining operation. But it is not now. In fact, the vampire drone is it's a sort of a quadcopter. It's actually a 6-copter. Oh, here's a version that is actually for heavy lift rotors. Interesting. Clearly they've made some upgrades, but you could see here that this guy is going to be using it as not as a combat drone, not as a remote miner, not even as a bomber, but as a logistics drone. You can see literally what he's got. He has trash bags that are stuffed and weighted with an exact amount of making sure they're not overweight. And then the drone is going to run out. It's going to drop water, food, munitions, medical supplies, specific tools, for example, a spare part for a weapon. They point out that they're just simply laid out in a huge dugout, strapped to the drone's bomb bay and fly off, right? Secured with cape and zip ties. What's fascinating is that it says that the drop is actually really dangerous. In fact, so much so that the Russians worked tirelessly to shoot down the FPV drones, the Baba Yagas, because they are seen as being extremely dangerous. In fact, it used to be, they said in 2024, the vampire drones would fly at night because it would be harder for them to be detected and taken down. But now the Russian drone teams have figured out how to spot the thermal signature of the Baba Yaga and take it out with their own FPVs. So now Baba Yagas simply fly at night or fly during the day, and more drones are lost. But as they point out, drones are expendable, right? Ukraine has a lot of money, but not a lot of soldiers. So they simply fly these logistics rolls out. They up to 20 flights a day and just change out batteries and fly and fly and fly. These guys need water constantly, and they can't carry it the 20 kilometers to positions. So they point out that simply what they do is drop the supply package, essentially as though it were a bomb, drop it onto an area or a forested area near a Ukrainian position, and then a Ukrainian soldier will scamper out, grab it, and scamper it back to his bunker. What you may be thinking is, but Paul, if that drone is observed, won't it allow the Ukrainians or the Russians to reveal a Ukrainian position? And to that I say, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And that's, well, just another risk, and why this war is so unbelievably difficult, and why, again, the right answer is to scatter a thin film sort of soldiers across the front line in groups of 1 or 2, because once they're detected, Russian FPVs, it's trivially easy for them to weave in and find them and strike. Or again, as the Ukrainians point out, for them to simply use their drones as effectively mortar rounds to say, listen, we don't know if we're going to hit them, but we know they're in this area, and so we're just going to have drones bomb them from every angle we can get away with. It's a brutal, brutal reality. Somehow, when I was there in November, it already seemed like kind of a brutal reality where the game was just about detection. Reconnaissance drones were zipping all over the front line, looking for any sign of life in a Russian position. A bag of trash that appeared overnight, they would tell them, oh, the Russians are bunkered up near here. A thermal netting, a broken branch, any sign of life, they would use that to strike into those Russian positions. But the fact that this has escalated to another level entirely, is just a sign that, as we've talked about on this channel ad nauseum, perhaps, that the reality of war, of modern combat, is not necessarily, oh, drones that do this, drones that do that. It's evolution. It's the idea that in 6 months of war, the war will totally change. As they point out, that from in January of 2025, there was Russian armored assaults, mechanized assaults going through roadways. And literally here we are just 8 mere months later, and the armored assaults, motorized assaults, mechanized assaults, gone, vanished, replaced by tiny groups pressing, weaving their way through the front lines, relying on cover. Drones went from precision strike weapons. They went from airdropped drones, right, that were sort of kind of not really all that precise, to precision FPV guided drones, to now they're back to being FPV guided drones, but still just kind of area weapons meant to deter or force the Russians out of a specific position. And what's fascinating too is that I remember in 2023, they said that, the best time for offensive operations was the summer because, well, that was when the ground was stable and tanks and armored vehicles could traverse freely. Now, the opposite is true. The best time for offensives is the summer because the dense foliage prevents observation of troops, and the hot weather reduces the apparent thermal signature of infantry soldiers. This is in contrast. In winter, you're going to see the foliage vanish. Soldiers are going to be more exposed. A human's body heat is going to glow like a chem light against the backdrop of sub-freezing temperatures. So you're going to see some pretty dramatic shifts in the winter, but the war is going to evolve with that as well. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Thank you so much to our Colonel tier members like Peter Fucci, Dan M, Petro, Henry Rusio, Ida Sky, Call Chris Rossi, Al 90, Sergey Danchenko, D Stewart, James Porsche, B Hemmerling, and all of our Lieutenant tier members. You guys are the ones who keep this channel sustained, keep me able to do this every single day. I appreciate each and every one of you, and hit that subscribe button. See you in the next one. Cheers.